So when I start a project, I want to create an environment where it is not accessible to the web public, and so what I can do is I can create a local development environment. What I usually am working on is either a website or a web application. A local development environment will allow me to develop, make changes, test as much as I want to on my computer, on my local machine, laptop, desktop, without it affecting the live site. So in that regard, it won't be available to the general public. Once I'm happy with the changes that I've made, or the progress that the project is in, and it's ready to move over to a live site, then I can go ahead and move that on over. Here we're going to cover creating that local development environment on my local machine. This will take 3 main steps. First, we're going to have to go ahead and install a server locally on this machine, and that's going to simulate the web host, which is what serves up your pages and provides the address so that when folks go to whatever.com, the pages are served and that's what they see. And we're going to have to configure our Apache configuration file. We're also going to have to configure our virtual host file and our host file on your system. So the first thing we want to do is install that server. Now, I've already got it installed. What I'm using is a program called XAMPP right here. I'm not going to cover installation or configuration for XAMPP. We're just going to go ahead and use it. I've got it ready to go. You can Google or search YouTube for installation of XAMPP and configuration. There's plenty of videos and tutorials out there. So I'm going to go ahead and launch our XAMPP control panel, and I'm going to start up our server, Apache, and then MySQL as well. So this is what we call a stack. So XAMPP will have a stack of Apache, MySQL, which will come with PHP. So we've got both of those running. We want to test it in our browser, make sure that it is working. I've got Firefox open, and I'm just going to go to localhost. So this localhost will be your primary domain. Okay. By default, when you install XAMPP, it creates a directory for you. That directory is what this browser, or any browser, when you go to localhost, will serve as pages. So in that directory is a set of pages, and that's what it's serving right now. So by default, it is pointing to localhost, and then there's a file that directs you to a XAMPP folder that has another file in it, and that's what we're seeing. So we're going to change that. Okay, here in this video we're going to cover setting up the primary domain. In the next video we're going to cover setting up the subdomains, which are your virtual hosts. So we're going to minimize our browser, and we can configure our Apache configuration file in a couple of places. One is here with the config button. So if we go to the first option, Apache httpd.conf, that's going to open up our configuration file, and then we can also find that file in the installation, which is where XAMPP installed this server. And so by default on a Windows machine, it's going to install it into your C drive. So I'm going to go into our C drive, and we will see it right here. So we've got XAMPP ACMS. Now this is 2 separate installations. What we're concerned with is going to be the XAMPP ACMS. In a default installation, if you just go through the steps, you won't see that ACMS. I intentionally put that there to just kind of differentiate the two. However, jumping in, they're both the same. So what we're looking at here is htdocs. And if we look at our Apache configuration file, I'm going to press Control F to search for our document root. There's a bunch of configurations in here. We're not going to cover any one of them really, except for the ones that are going to get us up and running with our local development environment. So I've typed in document root, and I'm looking for this piece of code right here. So what this is saying is serve up the pages that are in htdocs within the XAMPP ACMS folder. So that's what we're seeing right here. Okay, and there we are. We want to change that. We want to specify where we want pages to serve from for our primary domain, that being localhost, when we type it into our browser. So I've already got a code snippet for this, but first we're going to have to create that directory. I'm going to create a new directory in our C drive. So right in here, I'm going to create a new folder, call it web_dev. Inside of web_dev, I'm going to create another folder. That's going to be www. Okay. And so in here, I'm going to create two more folders, and these folders are going to be our subdomains. Okay, so sandbox1, and then sandbox2. Here in our root directory of our primary domain, I'm just going to put in a PHP file. It's just got a small code snippet that just outputs to the browser what our current directory is. I'm also going to copy and paste that into the other two. These are just acting as test files for us to test to make sure that we are seeing the right directory and that our subdomains are showing up. So here we are, we've got our new directory set. There's our primary domain. Here's our subdomains. Okay, so I'm going to go into our configuration files and I'm going to comment out the default directory, and I'm going to create the directory to point to the new directory that I just made, that I want to make our primary directory. Okay, I've got a code snippet here. I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste that in. Okay, save the file, and we'll see that we're pointing it to our C drive web dev folder www. Okay, so when you save this file, you're going to have to restart your Apache server. Stop, start, and if I go to localhost, there we are. It takes us right to that directory. I'm going to put these side by side so we can see it. There we are. And that's exactly what we're seeing in here. So if I click on this, that file just tells us what directory we're currently in. Alright, so this sets up our primary domain. We would also set up our host file. So in order for this to really work, we're going to have to modify our host file for this address to be recognized so we can see it in the browser. Now on a Windows machine, we'll find that host file in our C drive. On the Windows, System32, drivers, etc. And here's our host. We're going to have to open that up in some kind of text editor. I'm using Sublime Text 3. Here we are. Here's what our host file looks like. Now right now, we don't really have to make any changes. What happens is, by default, this address 127.0.0.1 is localhost. When we add our subdomains, or bring in our virtual host, we're going to have to jump in here and declare specifically where we want those subdomains to point to, so that we can access them in our browser. For example, we'll have localhost. Our first subdomain is sandbox1.localhost. Right now we're not going to see anything because we haven't set it up in our virtual host file or in our host file. So here we go. Nothing shows up. We're going to set that up in the next video. It's also important to note that when you're changing anything in any one of these files, syntax, any syntax errors, you want to make sure that you have your syntax correct, because it can wind up throwing you into a loop. You can wind up troubleshooting for a while, and it'll just hold you back. So be sure that your syntax is okay. Alright, I'll see you in the next video.